Today we're going to go over 5 specific natural remedies for anxiety. How can you begin to reduce anxiety naturally? We're going to go over 5 specific ways to do that. And number 5 might actually surprise you. It's something that oftentimes doctors and even mental health therapists often overlook, but it can actually really impact your mood and specifically anxiety. So the first one, number 1, is limiting caffeine. Now, some of you might be like, well, that's obvious, Lori. Caffeine is a stimulant. And yes, it is a stimulant. And oftentimes when you have too much caffeine, which I think sometimes we can underestimate the amount of caffeine that we're intaking, especially if you are a regular coffee drinker, that amount of caffeine can really be amping up your anxiety levels. So I've actually spoken with some other mental health practitioners, and one of the therapists that I was speaking to had mentioned how she was having a conversation with her client and they just rattled off all of the super anxious symptoms that they were experiencing, like nearing a panic attack. The heart was elevated, racing all the time. Their thoughts were just racing nonstop and they couldn't quiet their mind. And she did just a biopsychosocial inventory about what's happening in her life, what's happening in her environment, in her relationships, job, all of those things, right? It turns out she was drinking about 6 or 7 cups of coffee a day. Now, for some of you, you might be like, oh, that's what I do every day. So again, if it's your norm, you may not actually be taking into account what that is doing to your nervous system and more specifically anxiety. You might actually not know how good it feels, how much ease and peace and calm that you can feel in your nervous system when you have half as much caffeine, when you drink half as much coffee. Or, what I'm saying is that the caffeine can actually really be playing a big part in your anxiety symptoms. So that's the first thing. In fact, I'm actually drinking some Moroccan mint tea right now. I will admit I was tempted to make myself another cup of coffee before I jumped on to film this. And I thought to myself, I think I've had enough caffeine today. And I know that if I drink too much, for me personally, part of the anxiety symptoms that I feel from too much caffeine is I start to feel tension, more specifically in my jaw and even my muscles. It's almost like my body just starts to tense up. And I do also notice more elevated heart rate and also my thoughts. Like my thoughts just seem to be running on the treadmill rather than just walking through life with ease. They're just ramped up. So anyway, herbal tea, Moroccan mint. So you can also just, supplement with some herbal beverages as well, or whatever beverage of choice that you prefer that is going to provide more of a tonal effect on your nervous system and not get you so amped up. Okay, so number 1 is limiting caffeine. And number 2 is exercise, getting adequate amount of exercise. We're going to talk about 2 specific forms of exercise. So resistance or weight training and cardiovascular training. So something that gets your heart rate up. So think jogging or cycling or swimming or hiking or something like that, where your heart rate gets elevated. So I'm going to read this study to you that was done in 2018 by the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. And this study investigated the impact of resistance strength training on specifically anxiety and depression. And there was also a subgroup of women in this study. It was a 10-week resistance training program. And what they found is, well, first of all, they measured anxiety and depression symptoms both before and after the study. And what the findings showed is that the participants who engaged in strength training for that 10-week program significantly reduced their levels of anxiety. Keyword, significantly reduced their levels of anxiety. Now, another reason why I'm sharing this is not just because of this study or, probably thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of other studies out there that talk about the benefits of strength training and more specifically its impact on your mental health. And we're talking more specifically about anxiety right now. But I also wanted to include this because I know personally, for me personally, when I strength train, regularly strength train, I notice a difference. And I'll even say this, even if I have gone through a drought, so to speak, of not having consistent strength training, and I actually, let's say for example, I haven't strength trained in a week and a half, and I go to do a strength training workout, I always feel better afterwards. In fact, sometimes, if I'm having just kind of a difficult day or week, my husband will encourage me to go lift some weights because he knows I'm always going to feel better afterwards. And that is speaking from a coach. He's actually a strength coach, a strength and conditioning coach, and so he's got a lot of background in his experience in terms of the benefits of everything. But he's also seen for me personally that I'm just a happier, more pleasant person to be around when I am consistently strength training. So there are many, many, many other benefits of strength training. But again, for the purpose of the video today, we're talking about elevated anxiety. So what is something that you can do? Now, let's talk about the strength training in a little bit more depth, because I think for some of you watching, maybe you've never lifted a weight in your life and you're like, that just feels really intimidating. I wouldn't even know where to start if I go to the gym. So a lot of gyms, generally, not all, but a lot of gyms will have staff there that can help you and orient you to, just teach you how to use the different machines and things like that. And there's a lot of resources out there online that can support you in, just as a beginner, how do you begin to strength train and do it safely as well. But even just getting a pair of dumbbells at your house or some resistance bands or things like that and doing some home workouts, that's going to be a really, really great first start. So I highly believe in the power of baby steps. So, if you've never weight trained, this is not a video saying, oh, you need to go train for a powerlifting competition like I did a couple of years ago. That's not what this is about. This is about a leaf just fell on my plant. This is really just about motivating you and encouraging you. So some of the additional ways that strength training helps with mood specifically is it helps to increase your endorphins and neurotransmitters such as serotonin, which is your feel-good chemical. The other thing that it does is it reduces cortisol. Cortisol is the stress hormone that we don't want a plethora of in our bodies. So those are a couple good reasons to begin to do some strength training. So what about cardiovascular training? So anything that gets your heart rate up, like I mentioned, hiking, biking, swimming, jogging, things like that. So it has the same impact on your mental health and mood because it does increase your endorphins, just like resistance training. It decreases cortisol, just like resistance training. There are a lot of other physical benefits and longevity benefits of cardiovascular training, which I'm not going to get into in this video. I'm not necessarily differentiating all of the specifics between strength training and cardiovascular training. But again, how does it impact anxiety levels? It reduces them significantly. Again, if you go outside or perhaps just jump on a treadmill, even if it's inside at the gym, at your house, or whatever, you're going to feel so much better when you do any kind of exercise. And the other thing that I'll encourage you with is, even if you don't have as much time as you want to for exercise, do it anyway. So for example, if you have a really hectic schedule one day and you really want, let's say for example, you generally squeeze in 45 minutes into your schedule for exercise, and today you only have 10 minutes at lunchtime on your break to go for a walk around the block, go do that. There are so many of my clients that notice wonders in their clarity, in their just their mood and their outlook on their day and their stress levels simply by taking a break and going for a walk for 10 minutes, if that is all that they have. So this morning, when I go and jog out in nature, I usually allot about 45 minutes or so minimum, between 45 minutes to an hour or so. And today I only had 30 minutes and I was tempted to skip it because I was like, well, I don't have my 45 minutes. I did the 30 minutes anyway, and it felt so good. And I feel so much better by simply doing what I can with what I have right now today. So I encourage you to give yourself some flexibility to not be so rigid. If your schedule tends to, get filled with things that are unexpected, just squeezing in a few things, even if it's just doing like 10 push-ups every hour. Maybe you have clients every hour, or you have meetings every hour, and you have just 10 minutes between these like meetings or whatever to do something like sit-ups or push-ups, or do a little bit of yoga at your desk, or whatever it is. All of those little things are going to make a difference. Number 3 is journaling, but not just journaling, more specifically, journaling paired with bilateral music. So music where you're listening to headphones, you have headphones plugged into both ears, and the music alternates. It goes back and forth from left to right, left, right, left, right. When the music is going to the left, your right hemisphere of your brain is lighting up. When the music switches back to the right, the left hemisphere lights up. So there's this constant switching back and forth, so that both hemispheres of your brain are constantly being triggered, so to speak. And what that does, there's actually a few things that it does when you're listening to music as you're, journaling things, especially if you're journaling about something that's bothersome, where you're kind of brain dumping all of the things that are on your mind. So even if you're not writing out all of these sentences in, full sentences, and you just actually create a list of just brain dumping things that are on your mind, that can also be so helpful in reducing anxiety, because oftentimes part of the rat race that's happening in our mind is that there are so many to-do lists, for example, that are constantly trying to get our attention to be like, remember this, remember that, remember this, don't forget that. If we simply just take time to transfer that constant noise that's happening in our brains, if we transfer it onto paper, it really can help minimize the noise. So whether you're just brain dumping and making lists of things on paper, or you're actually journaling your thoughts and feelings about something, I highly recommend coupling that with bilateral music. Why bilateral music? So bilateral music is actually something that I incorporate into my brain spotting sessions with my clients. You might often see this also in sessions such as EMDR or something like that. I personally use a lot of brain spotting with my clients in sessions, and when we couple the bilateral music, what happens is the auditory part of your processing of their brain, when that is activated, it tends to allow deeper emotional processing in the deeper parts of your brain, especially with more painful emotions. So oftentimes when we go to process emotions, sometimes we can get really flooded. We get really overwhelmed with the emotions. And so we tend to just avoid processing emotions altogether, because you're just like, man, this is so overwhelming. I can't even do this. I don't have time for this. I don't have energy for this. And so then we just avoid emotional processing. When you add the auditory bilateral music, it can really soften the intensity. It can make that feeling of overwhelm decrease and so much more manageable in processing difficult emotions. So even if you're going around the house and even just doing things that you don't really want to do, like chores, for example, or if you don't really like doing laundry, or you don't like doing dishes, or whatever it is that needs to be done around the house or even in your yard, and you don't really want to do it, there's kind of like this inner angst about it, try putting in headphones and picking some music. You can find it on Spotify, you can find it on YouTube Music, you can find it on a lot of the music apps out there. Just search bilateral music. You could also search things like brain spotting music, EMDR music, things like that. And you'll find a lot of different tracks, and just plug in your earplugs and just listen to music that makes you feel good. I personally like more nature-based nature sounds when I use bilateral music. But try that, because I think that actually helps to, like I said, process emotions more effectively, because it just softens things. And It just helps to calm your nervous system. It makes things that feel really overwhelming, it makes them feel so much more manageable. So not just brain dumping or journaling, but brain dumping or journaling coupled with bilateral music. That's number 3. So number 4 is aromatherapy. Using aromatherapy, the sense of smell, to calm your emotions. So I personally like to use a variety of different essential oils and diffuse them as a way to incorporate aromatherapy. So how does aromatherapy actually calm your emotions, or potentially calm your emotions, or reduce anxiety? So the olfactory part of your brain that's connected with your sense of smell is very much tied to your limbic brain, the part of your brain that processes emotions, as well as the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain that is associated with memories. So oftentimes if you smell something that reminds you, brings up a memory from, let's say, your childhood, for example, and it gives you this pleasant feeling. So there's a memory coupled with an emotion or a series of emotions that brings a sense of good feelings. The olfactory system, the sense of smell, can evoke it just like that. So for example, if you smell a familiar smell, such as, I don't know, maybe brownies baking in the oven, that reminds you of the brownies that your grandma used to make when you were a kid, and it brings up these really pleasant memories. Or perhaps, even though brownies may smell good, perhaps you have a negative association with brownies. Maybe brownies in the oven is associated with a memory that you have from your past when you got bad news about a loved one that was killed in a car accident or something like that. So there's a lot of ways in which even good smells can actually evoke a really difficult, unpleasant emotion or memory. And so when we're working with aromatherapy, you obviously want to choose aromas that bring up the pleasant and the calm and just calm your nervous system. So there's a lot of common ones that are used in aromatherapy to reduce anxiety. Lavender tends to be a popular one for reducing anxiety. Citrus oils tend to kind of elevate your mood, and they're also known to be a little more energizing, generally speaking. Some of my favorite ones are the more grounding essential oils. So essential oils that are made from different trees are my personal favorite. So like cedarwood or cypress or fir, or like all the different trees that you can think of. I really love those ones because to me, they just feel more grounding, and I'm just such a tree lover as well. So using some aromatherapy can help to calm your nervous system and reduce anxiety. So try some aromatherapy and see if that makes a difference in your mood. Okay, number 5, and this is the one that I mentioned that might surprise you. If you have inadequate levels of vitamin D3, it can elevate anxiety. So I'm going to read to you a study that was done from the Neuropsychiatric Disease and Treatment. In this study, researchers examined the relationship between vitamin D levels and anxiety in a large sample of young adults. And what they found is that individuals with lower levels of vitamin D were significantly more likely to report symptoms of anxiety. So one of the other things that this study mentioned is that vitamin D is thought to influence your brain function through its interaction with vitamin D receptors in the areas of your brain that are involved in mood regulation, such as the hippocampus and the amygdala. So low levels of vitamin D might interfere with these areas, and it can lead to mood disorders, including elevated anxiety. So again, this is not something that you often hear spoken about in your medical office with your doctor, or even in your therapy office with your therapist. Vitamin D levels tend to fly below the radar when it comes to anxiety, but it can have a really big impact on your anxiety levels. The other thing that you might notice too, if you notice that your anxiety levels tend to spike, especially in the winter months, when vitamin D levels tend to be lower in most of our population, generally because we're not having as much exposure to the sun, which we have, if we have, direct sunlight onto our skin, that produces natural vitamin D. And by the way, vitamin D, even though it's called a vitamin, it is actually a hormone. There's a whole lot of really, really, really great benefits of vitamin D3. And the deficiencies, if we have any deficiencies, it can cause, it is attributed to so many things out there that are not good, and we don't want to have any of that. So I highly recommend, getting your vitamin D levels checked by your practitioner, running a lab for that, and supplementing with vitamin D3. I take vitamin D3 with K2. I generally take 5,000 IU during the summer months, and I load up and I take on average like 10,000 daily, 10,000 IU of D3 during the winter months. Now, most doctors, and I'm not giving you any kind of medical advice here, I'm just telling you simply what I personally do, okay? You consult your doctor and, your healthcare practitioner or your nutritionist or whatever to determine what's going to be the most adequate levels for you personally. But I will say that a lot of doctors that I've spoken with have, told me, oh, vitamin D3, like 10,000 IU is way, way, way too much. And yet, nearly every single time I get my vitamin D measured and a doctor is reviewing my labs, they're like, oh my God, your vitamin D levels are the best I've ever seen. So, and again, that's just how my body is absorbing the vitamin D3 at, optimally, obviously, which is really great. So do your research on vitamin D and what's going to be the best level for you. But just note that I wanted to bring this up in this video specifically because it is something that often is missed when we're talking about elevated anxiety. Please let me know in the comments below which one of these 5 natural remedies is the one that really jumps out to you the most. Maybe it's just a reminder of something that you already knew and you just needed to be reminded of it. Or if it's something new, perhaps you learned something new today and it's something that you want to begin to incorporate. Or perhaps you even have some experience in incorporating one or more of these natural remedies to decrease anxiety. So leave your comment below because others can learn from you as well. So thanks for joining, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.